Haribol, sweet souls, welcome to our fifth Nectar of Instruction class in our sacred study of Shastra. We're so happy you're here. Shami Pras is here. He just muted momentarily. We're going to have a short kirtan and then we will get going. So come into a comfortable seat, please. Yeah. Yeah, I see Melanie stretching. Stretch. Either maybe you're at your computer all day or you're rushing around, whatever it was. Take whatever movement you need to be able to settle and arrive here together. And then taking your seat, if you so choose, closing your eyes or just setting your focus, your gaze to this internal place of connection as we drop into exploration of Shastra, this transcendental sound vibration, which is Shastra, which is kirtan. Actually, just talking about Shastra is kirtan. And we'll also do a little kirtan. So take a deep breath in, fill up through your nose. Open your mouth, exhale, let it go. We'll start with our opening prayers. Om Jnanatimandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasudeva Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Bolo.
Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. All together. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Again. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Two more times. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Bhagavana ki.
Jai.
Jai Shri Shri Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki.
Jai.
Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki. Nectar of Instruction Shastra Study Group ki. Haribol. Haribol. Okay. I'm gonna mute and switch things here.
Om Jnana Timirantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuruniritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatrupshascha Kripa Santupya Evacha Patitanam Pavanepyo Vaishnavepyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. Great to be with you always. So we're on the 5th class of the Sri Nectar of Instruction, Upadeshamrita of Srila Rupa Goswami. And we're exploring the second half of the second verse. We last week looked at the first 3 items to be avoided in devotional service. And we had some beautiful reflections on that discussion, and also discussions of how applying these principles in our lives, how that's going, trying to apply those, not trying to avoid those 3 activities. So let's get any reflections, and you can also just reiterate if you want. Even let's get at least a couple of reflections of things that came up with this second verse. The 6 things to be avoided that impede one's devotional practice. Things that came up in your reflections are also in the class. And then we'll go into the second half of the verse. Just a reminder that those 3 things were atyahara, overeating, and over-collecting, taking in too much. Priyasaha, over-endeavor. So trying very hard for things that are material, over-endeavor. Prajalpa, and then misusing the speech.
I have something that actually came, I forgot you said it until I was reading reflections, and Leanne wrote a reflection today that I loved, and really was like, wow, if I could think about that even more on a regular basis. Of many conversations I had this week, that would have been very helpful, of thinking about what are my intentions in the conversation, and am I trying to learn from this person or know the truth?
Right. Yeah, that's from ultimately it's from the principles of Nyaya, logic, that we also draw from, that they describe the different kinds of discourse. Discourse in the mode of ignorance is I want to take the other person down. That's success. Discourse in the mode of passion is the goal is to win, that I want to prove myself right and I want to show that I'm correct, or my point of view is correct. In the mode of goodness, your goal and the goal of the persons you're talking to is the same. Your goal is to ascertain truth, to explore it, to see what actually is true, what works, what doesn't make sense. And if that means that you're right or wrong, or they're right or wrong, we don't really care. We want to actually expand our understanding of truth and share it with others. And the highest form of discourse is when we actually hear from those who are very spiritually advanced in a humble and receptive state of mind, just like Arjuna did at the beginning of Bhagavad Gita. He starts by like having objections, and then ultimately he realizes, like, I can't figure this out. Krishna, you please, I'll be your student. I'm no more like talking between equals. I'll be below you. You be above me. I'm accepting you that way. Please speak. And so then Krishna really starts to go. So those are the kind of levels of discourse, and how we know where we are is we examine our intention for conversing. Intention is a very subtle thing. It's actually in many ways the most subtle thing. It's why we're doing what we're doing. Because nobody can really tell from the outside, although they can get a sense, There's that expression, that person had commission breath. Like, they're talking to me and I can tell they're trying to sell me something. Their intention is to make money. They don't actually care about my well-being. They don't actually care about whether or not there's a better product out there for me, or whether I should be spending my money at all. They are clearly working on commission, and I can tell by their energy. But the more subtle levels, our intention is very, very much a personal thing. And it's up to us, especially, to look inside ourselves and see, what is my intention entering this situation? Is it up here? Is it here? Is it down there? Is it some mixture? And then results will follow accordingly.
Mhm.
Any more reflections? Thank you for that. Any more reflections from last week?
I'm like gonna just pick someone. Let's hear something from someone in the Bhakti house. And he was like, not me. Someone in the Bhakti house, come on up.
There we go. We have 3 bright souls there.
You gotta unmute, yep.
We're unmuted.
But you want to say something? I'll say something. Nobody else will. My reflection is on over collecting things. And yeah. And I'm just, as I declutter my house, I also feel like I'm decluttering my head at the same time. And just making space for things that really matter inside, instead of all this stuff that's just taking up too much space.
Mm-hmm.
Plain living and high thinking.
Decluttering.
Yeah. Did you guys hear Tracy?
No.
Plain living and high thinking.
Yes.
Yeah, that's Prabhupada's expression. Yeah, that's mode of goodness living. It involves some lifestyle management to declutter. And this has come up in a few conversations I've had recently. It's a common theme because a lot of people kind of come to this point pretty earlier in their practice, where they realize Krishna in their heart helps them realize, I actually want to declutter. I actually want to live a simple life. There's too many complications. So this is in alignment with what Rupa Goswami is saying, to avoid atyahara, overeating, but also over collecting. And then so for one who is like slowed down their collecting, they may already have a collection. They may already have things. They may have too many Facebook friends they don't know, too many books they don't read, too much space in their home. They want to get a smaller home, or they have too many possessions, or too much junk in the junk drawer, or too many jingles memorized and in their brain, commercial jingles or whatever, different things. And it's just a process of letting them go, atyahara. So over collecting means like not taking in more, but also not holding on to more, right? Not over retaining, because the more you hold on to, the more you got to carry. And when we start practicing bhakti, we realize that everything I stuff my pockets with, I got to lug around, and becomes a bit of a drag. And I want to let the unnecessary things go, so I can be lean and sleek, move quickly through this material world and get to my goal. Tanya, if you have too many books on essentialism, is that really wrong? Meaning, I guess, books on spiritual topics, is it wrong? It's not wrong. There is some subtlety to that. However, because Srila Prabhupada talked about, I mentioned this in passing, but I'll mention it again. He talked about sometimes some of the followers in the Krishna consciousness movement, although they've been given the essential books, and we're talking like Srila Prabhupada translated 60, 80 books, right? Although they've been given these essential books and guidance on which is right for them at their level and what to read next, they'll sometimes, there's a way in which the mind starts to think like, yeah, but that's what everyone else is doing. So if I find something even more obscure, even if it is from the Bhakti tradition, like this is a book from Bhaktivinoda Thakur that hasn't even been translated into English yet. So actually, if I know that, then I'm really special, right? So you just got to watch out for that tendency to kind of like, well, yeah, Prabhupada gave us these books, but I can just jump over that and I can read the same books in Sanskrit, or I can not take his commentary and just figure it out on my own, but there's a way in which you can kind of outsmart yourself that way. So I personally have a pretty significant library of books, but I know each one has a purpose, right? Like either I've read them, I'm going to read them, or for many of them, they're reference books for many of them, I will never actually read cover to cover in my life, but I know that, and they function as reference books. So they're not just taking up, because there's a way in which they can be like kind of eye candy or brain candy to have, and that's not bad, especially in the beginning, but because you're populating your shelf with like actually great things, that's good. But ultimately, you got to ask yourself if you're reading them and reading the right ones and reading the right order. If you're doing that, then yeah, it's great, it's fantastic. Actually, our whole movement is based on transcendental literature, and I always say, like, the Srimad Bhagavatam is like a cell phone. Everyone has to have one of their own. So if you have a household with 4 people in it, everyone should have their own Srimad Bhagavatam set, because you can be in different places. It's like such essential reading. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. So within the basic answer of that's great, just a little bit of nuance. Thank you. All right.
I really resonated with that, Tanya, as you know. And before I do my reflection, I just want to say I packed an entire box full of books to donate to the Vietnam veterans today.
Oh, wonderful.
Clearing them out.
Yeah.
Not even a drop in the bucket, but okay. I have a reflection on a reflection. So the reflection on the reflection are the I statements that Julia put in the chat. They resonated with me very, very strongly. And I know that they did for a couple other people in the group too, because they responded to them. And I just wanted to thank you, Julia, for putting those statements together so succinctly and so beautifully. And it would be really, really cool if they were a poster. Poster. So thank you. They were terrific. They were a wonderful reflection.
Jai, that's part of the value of studying in a sangha and group, that the reflections are never, even if they're things that we may have thought of, they're never in the same words, and they're always very fresh. Yeah. Thank you. All right, moving into the rest of the verse today. The verse itself, Atyahara prayasascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha laulyamcha sharbir bhaktir vinashati. So the last 3 points, I'll just share the screen. Or what we're, oops, can you enable screen sharing?
Yes.
So I'll just read out that the last 3 points are practicing. So niyamagraha, practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement, or rejecting the rules and regulations and working independently or whimsically. I'll just do one at a time. So this one is what I'm going to focus on, I think, more than the other 2 today, but we're going to go through all 3. So niyamagraha and niyamagraha, they're both contained within that Sanskrit word of niyamagraha, one with a short A, one with a long A, and they're related, and they're very much part of the duality of the material world. So you have all these rules and regulations, and niyamagraha means you abandon the rules and regulations. You basically, so as devotees, as practicing devotees, we have a relationship with the rules. They're like the advisements, the advice of great devotees, the advice of scripture. We always have a relationship with that. So actually everybody does, because everybody has some opinion on whether there even are rules or how much they should follow them, like whether they're spiritual or social rules, morality, and so forth. But for us specifically as devotees, we all have to figure out for ourselves where we are in relationship to the different descriptions of how one should behave or what's next in one's advancement of Krishna consciousness. So niyamagraha means we want to be in that nice balance point where we're accepting the rules and regulations for the sake of advancement and not for their own sake. Because if you're accepting them for their own sake, then you're really attached to following the rules, and you're really attached to order and structure and tradition, but you don't really know why. And that's actually a fault. And on the other end, you can kind of fall off the other side of the balance beam, is to neglect them. And neglecting rules or neglecting advice also happens because we don't know why. So for example, I'll give you like a concrete example to kind of make this more clear. So let's say you grew up in North America, and you grew up in North America, and you are you're coming from, like a lot of North Americans, you're coming from a Christian tradition. Using this example because this is primarily North American population, right? And many of us have come from Christian backgrounds or growing up living in countries with, Christmas and Easter and so forth. So in the Christian tradition, in many branches of Christianity, like Christmas is considered a really important holiday. And so on Christmas, one may gather with family, and maybe there'll be some Christmas carols, right? And those Christmas carols, there's a variety of topics. You can sing about snowmen and reindeer, but also there's carols about Jesus Christ. And so someone may grow up with that. Now, if they come to Christmas time and they're like, oh, again with this, I gotta go to my grandparents and parents' house, and we're gonna sing these carols. Like, what's the deal? I don't know why we're doing this. Like, I'm gonna not do it this year. Then basically what they're doing is they don't know, because of ignorance, because it was never explained to them. They don't actually have a mature, thought out relationship with that particular practice of chanting and singing. They let go of it. And on the other end, there may be like the more traditional people are like, we're doing this. But if their kids ask them why you're doing it, they can't answer, because they also themselves have not fully fleshed out, fully understood, what is the purpose? What does this do for us? In terms of bhakti, we can say that chanting and hearing and singing, this is kirtan, right? This elicits remembrance of your prophet, your teacher, your incarnation, whoever it is you're talking about, right? So these are principles of bhakti. This is a non-sectarian science. I'm applying it outside of Krishna bhakti so that we can see the non-sectarian nature of it. Now, in that question of what do you do on Christmas, you can be like, we're doing it this way. That's how my parents did it. That's what, that's how the book says we do it. Or I'm letting it go because it doesn't make sense to me. But if either position is based on ignorance, if it's based on what makes sense to me and I'm just kind of like accepting it for selfish reasons, it's either niyamagraha or niyamagraha. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It's like either being on the liberal end of the spectrum, and it's like, I figure out everything. I don't care about tradition. I make it up as I go. Or the conservative is like, we have to do things the way it's always been done, but not knowing why. Those are actually both false. And so real spiritual life is non-sectarian. It's also not political. We're not fanatically attached to rules. And we're not so proud of our modern culture that we just take whatever our upbringing says and whatever we're used to and use that in place of the rules. Like, we're not going to be like, well, all the scriptures say chant Hare Krishna, but I'm used to just singing what's in the top 40 pop music, so I'll just do that, and it's got to be as good because I just like doing that, so it's going to get the same result. It's like, no, you've abandoned the scriptural regulations and you've made up something on the spot, right? But interestingly, like, just knowing all the rules and following them very strictly can also create a fault, because you just end up becoming like very attached to doing the thing you're supposed to do, but you can't really ascertain, well, what happens when two rules intersect, right? Like, let's say, this scripture says that we're supposed to fast on Ekadashi. Ekadashi is the 11th month, the 11th day of the waxing moon and waning moon. You're supposed to fast. And actually, in many places in North America, Ekadashi is tomorrow. Ekadashi exists to give people a day to really give them permission to focus on their spiritual life. And on that day, to support that, you spend less time shopping, cooking, eating, digesting, going to the bathroom, doing all that stuff. And you use that time to chant and read and meditate and sing kirtan and be with devotees and go inward, like that. But if you're like, oh, it says I have to fast, okay. But it also says somewhere else that if you're like, health is compromised, then you shouldn't fast. But it says both of them so hard line. Like, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to fast or not fast? You see, this kind of like linear thinking, I have to follow the rules, cannot assess what to do when the rules intersect with each other. So for example, you should never follow a rule about fasting or anything else around the body if it sacrifices your health. Common sense. You could probably figure that out on your own, but you'd be surprised how many people in different traditions do not. They become fanatical. So one side is whimsical, abandoning rules and becoming like self-guided. You're your own teacher. Everyone's their own teacher. This whole liberal modern concept of we're all on the same level, everybody's on the same spiritual level, we can all figure ourselves out. That's whimsical. The other end is like fanatical. It's got to be like this, but I can't tell you why. And if there's like a bunch of different rules at the same time, I guess I'll just do all of them. I don't know how it works. Don't ask me, you know? And we can see how that's a problem. I think like one common trend I've found among people practicing bhakti when they come to Krishna consciousness, if they have good sangha, if they have good association, they start to feel like their questions are being answered. Whereas for many people in different traditions, even in Hindu traditions, they may have felt like they're doing things because of culture. They're not really told why. If they ask why, they become unpopular. It's like, it's not considered good. You're asking too many questions. Just do it, right? So when spiritual wisdom is lost and you just do things on momentum, it becomes like petrified wood. It looks like a real tree, but it's just hard. It's not actually real. It's not alive anymore. So that's like a culture devoid of philosophy, you know? So if people are told to follow rules, eventually when they start to ask questions and they don't get any answers, they cease to have any respect for the tradition. They have less respect. They stop practicing. They move away from it. Mm-hmm. So in order to get away from blind following, you have to have strong philosophical explanations and people who live that philosophy and are examples of it. You know, like if I tell you, it's good to take some time out, you know, every week or every couple of weeks or every month, and just give yourself a break from the grind and give yourself permission to just dive into your spiritual practice. And I do that, and in my life, and I've been doing it for a few years, and this is what it looks like for me. And this is why it works. Then when you read that thing about Ekadashi or something, fasting once every 2 weeks for the sake of your spiritual life, you won't think, oh, if I eat, like I'm actually just like, you know, letting Krishna down, or if I don't eat, like I'm actually getting more spiritually advanced because I'm starving myself. Like those kinds of things will come into it. You realize, oh, it's actually about saving time. It's about saving energy. It's really practical. And you know what? It is nice to not have to like deal with this body and put it in the center of my world all day, every day. It's nice to take a little time and just put Krishna in the center, and I'll just eat some fruits and nuts and I'm good, you know, or whatever. So we have a question from Erin. I'll pause here and we'll take her question and probably more questions and comments. This is a nice topic, usually creates a lot of discussion. Go ahead, Erin.
So I would say I'm a recovering rule follower in the sense that in my life, I think I over-indexed on following the rules for like comfort and safety, or at times when I didn't really feel comfortable or safe. And I don't know if this is unique to me, but I think there have been times in my sort of bhakti journey where I had resistance to some of the rules, so to speak. And I know some of that resistance was probably personal over, you know, different elements, but I've often heard other people talk about this resistance. And is it just part of the journey of learning the why behind some of these things, and also what feels aligned to our life and our lifestyle and all the things that make us who we are? But I'm just curious, because this I would say I was probably more fanatical than whimsical in my life up until the last few years, and this one is still like hard for me to kind of feel like if I'm not doing it a certain way, then I'm not doing it right.
Right. Yeah.
Covering perfectionist.
Perfectionism. I can relate to that strongly. Yeah. I think if I would describe myself, I'm towards, my conditioning is more towards that end myself too. I like knowing how things work. I like asking questions, and those are good things, but I have taken it to a fault, and I have to watch out for that. One of the main things that we want to take away from this realization, this explanation of niyamagraha as like a two-sided thing with two poles, is exactly what you're talking about, is recognizing where our tendencies lie. Really humbly recognizing, either through ourselves or through guidance or a combination of both, and experience that, oh, I tend to go this way, or I'm that way, or actually I'm this way, but on this one topic, I'm actually really the other way. Because then you can see what your mind is doing and deal with it and help it come back to center. So in your question, I heard like, kind of like, why does this happen, right? You mentioned like, well, one thing is we can be attached for the sake of comfort and stability, security, and that's a fact. Everybody to some extent has a need for security, and having structure supports that, and that's part of what spiritual culture and scripture are providing, but not the main part. The main part is to go towards Krishna, but along the way we have a certain need for predictability, a sense of belonging, order, reason, and so that's also tended to secondarily. Like, however, it's not that when something is explained to us, we'll automatically then get over this kind of duality of like accepting it, not accepting it. It's not just something you can always get. Like, I'm strongly in favor of myself really studying and trying to understand why a rule or an injunction or a principle is there, and then meditate on it and like re-explain it in a modern context for people. Because when we do that, it gets around this tendency of like, well, I'm not gonna do something I don't understand. I need to get it. However, you can't explain your way to spiritual realization. It's not all in the head. So there's a tendency sometimes with people like you and I, who are attached to order and attached to things making sense, to need to kind of like pilot our own ship and figure out every step before we can take it, And that's not a bad thing sometimes, because it's good to look before you leap. And at the same time, the context of spiritual practice is that we're not in the world dealing with worldly things for a worldly goal. We're kind of in the world dealing with some worldly things and some subtle and spiritual things for a spiritual goal, ultimately. And so we're kind of in both worlds. So, for example, when we talk about, oh, fasting is good because it purifies, your day, you have more time to hear and chant. Like, that's really, the logical mind can appreciate that. Oh yeah, that makes sense. I'll have more time. Of course, more time means more ability to practice bhakti. However, I would say that's not the only reason that those injunctions exist, because, for example, like, there are aspects of things that are not explainable by the material mind. Like, why is it that chanting Hare Krishna in and of itself as a sound vibration has spiritual potency? If we ask that question of why, it's not a bad question to ask, but it's not one that we can come up with an answer to. Oh yeah, I ran the experiment. Actually, it's the R in Hare. That's like, you got 65.3% of all the potency. There's no science to that empirically. It's like, it just is. It just works. And the best we can do is receive what the great teachers in the scriptures say about it and take that in. And some of that will be revealed as we practice. Some of it may never be revealed. Krishna is actually infinite. So there's different categories. There's the stuff that we know right away when we hear it. There's the stuff we don't know, but we can come to learn when it's explained to us. There's the stuff that we don't know right away. We won't figure out when it's explained to us, but we'll figure out through experience, practice, and mercy. And then there's some stuff we'll never know, like directly, but whatever we need comes to us. Whatever we actually need comes to us. So part of the tendency of persons like myself is sometimes getting to a place of like, if I don't get it, I have to stop and I have to put a pause button on everything until I can get that thing, right? And if I can't get that, it's really a problem. And then I have to like doubt all the progress I've made, doubt everything I actually already know, and get all in my head about that thing. It's like, that thing itself may not be so important, and it may not even be within my quota of what Krishna needs me to personally experience in this lifetime. You know, like when they get to the 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are statements about the cosmology of the universe that not even like contradict what empirical science says. There are descriptions on an axis that's completely different. It's not even looking at things empirically. It's like multidimensional descriptions put into words, so they don't even completely make sense. And the greatest minds in our Bhakti tradition have basically said, here it is. You know, Krishna can reveal what this means in your heart if he wants to, but don't pretend you can figure it out. It's not going to happen. It's very deep. And unless our service is dealing with like truly understanding Vedic cosmology and representing that, we may never personally experience exactly what those chapters of Bhagavatam mean when they say those things. But if we hear them with faith, we'll still be purified. So for someone like you or I, there's the work of just like, oh, it's good to understand. It's good to come close to it and put your magnifying glass and look at it. And it's also good to recognize that that magnifying glass is always going to be weaker than Krishna. You can't resolve him with something that you've created, because we're just little parts of him. So that might help. There's some thoughts from my end. Does that resonate?
It does. I think for me, just throughout my journey, I've had to sort of like suspend some of those tendencies and just try to trust and have
Right.
faith. And it you know, and even it's easier now. Has been mind bending at times, but it's paid off.
Yeah. And on the other end, with whimsicality, being whimsical, interestingly, on both ends, you're going into material thought, and on both ends, you make yourself the teacher, because the person who over tries to understand everything, follow the rules, they convince themselves that they've understood everything completely, and because this rule is there, like they'll just do it because they get that it's there, so I got to follow it. Right? But they don't actually seek guidance on what the rule means, what its context is, how it interacts with other rules. So they end up being their own acharya, their own guru. And they just happen to be a fanatical guru. And that kind of fanaticism doesn't help. On the other end, it's like you hear scripture, you hear tradition, you hear spiritual culture, and you're like, well, no, you know, I don't think it works like that. I have like my ideas, or like sometimes you'll find people will criticize Krishna Bhakti that, well, you know, this is all just like very old-fashioned stuff. It's not relevant to us anymore. We've moved on. This is the 21st century. We don't need weird ideas from 5,000 or 3,000 or even 1,000 years ago. You know, we're like actually figuring things out that have never been figured out before. And there's this kind of like unspoken assumption that our modern culture is very advanced, and we've wrestled with these existential questions and found better solutions than what the tradition and the Shastra, scripture, has to say. And that's the other end. Is like, you know, I don't need to chant old mantras. I can make up my own mantra. I don't need to purify how I eat. I can figure it out. You know, right now in the modern world, there are multiple very firmly held opinions on what the healthiest diet is for human beings, and you know, there's no consensus. Even though personally, as someone with a master's in public health who studied nutrition, I think it's pretty clear that the best diet, even empirically, is a plant-based diet. You can find people who make a case using empirical science that it's not, that it's other things, or that it's this diet or that diet, or it's a mixture, or keto, or this or that, raw food. And it's like, it never ends, because if they're just trying to figure it out, everyone becomes their own acharya. And as soon as somebody establishes a theory, someone else can be like, yeah, no, I don't believe in that. I believe in this newer theory, you know? And so when it comes to spiritual tradition, ultimately, like persons who are like very prone to letting go of tradition, letting go of old things, and very attached to the modern way, they have to watch out that they don't whimsically let go of rules and regulations, thinking like, I'm beyond that. I don't need to follow this. Right. And so for that, it's like developing trust that things have been tried and tested before, that these traditions are actually addressing universal truths, that there is such a thing as dharma. You know, dharma means the nature of a thing. You know, the nature of water is to be wet. You can't You can't say, yeah, but in this country at this time of day it's not wet. No, it's always wet. So similarly, there's statements about like the power of hearing mantra, because the hearing sense is very powerful for the human being. That's dharma. It's the nature of this human body, is that we have all these senses, but of all of them, the sound can receive spiritual information with more subtlety than the other senses. That's just the dharma of it. It's the nature of this machine, right? And you can either accept that and work with it, or you can like, no, I don't think so. Or you can be like, oh, I want it proven. Show it to me, explain it to me. How is that so scientifically? But ultimately, we want to get to that point of like developing more and more trust. And so part of that is having things explained and having like logic. So it's not just blind following. And part of it is also letting go of our blind disbelief. So on the one hand, there's blind belief. Like I follow the tradition because my parents and everyone did it. This is just what it is. And like, I'm a by the book. I just do it. Blind following. The other end is blind not following, blind disbelief. You know, sometimes you have like people who are so anti-spirituality that no matter what you show them, they'll just dismiss it because they already have a belief system that doesn't allow that room for that in their lives. Like they're following the religion of science, or they're following the religion of materialism or whatever. Very, very intensely dedicated persons in that realm can become blind disbelievers. So it's important to have a certain amount of belief and a certain amount of like doubt. That both of those things are healthy. If you have no doubt, you're either completely realized or you're kind of a fanatic. And if you have all doubt, you're either completely crazy. What's the other thing you could say? Is that you're paralyzed. You're paralyzed. You can't really move. We're taking a bunch of things on faith. Like I don't even know how my smartphone works. I just trust that it works. Okay, it's never been explained to me. I don't know how like this laptop works. I know a little bit about electricity from physics class and first year college, but that wasn't my major. I just don't know how like electrical resistance and conductors, but somebody knows, and I trust them. So I use this thing every day. I trust the sun is going to rise. So we have to trust certain things, but we also have to have a certain amount of like healthy skepticism, healthy doubt. And when you're in that healthy place where you're willing to apply the culture in your life and see results, willing to ask intelligent questions, and willing to accept that some percentage of the answers may not be intelligible to you, may not be actually something you can grasp right away, and willing to associate with persons who are embodying and living at a higher level than you are, then you can go forward. Then you're not going to be in Niyamagraha or Niyamagraha. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Any more questions or reflections on this?
I'm glad you brought up blind doubt, right? Because you were speaking about blind following, but the other side of that is blindly doubting,
Right.
and just doubting everything that is said. And I think it's really normal to have resistance when you come into bhakti or you are on the path, and then here you catch wind that there's these 4 regulative principles, and then all of a sudden I'm not meat eating. It says no meat eating, no illicit sex, no gambling, no intoxicants. It's like, wait, these are the things that I've done my whole life that brought me enjoyment, and all of a sudden I'm not allowed to do them anymore, and it can feel like a really harsh rule or regulation, right? But I think we were talking about last week about how they're actually meant to allow for more freedom,
Right.
right? Because they ultimately lead to that. But when we're newer on our path, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like I'm losing everything that everyone around me does,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not allowed to do it anymore, and so I'm restricting myself, and therefore I feel it can feel fanatical. And the people around you who are not practicing it will often reflect back to you that you are fanatical. Even if you are approaching it in a healthy way. So there's also this level of what society is imprinting upon us. And based on what we consider to be normal is actually not natural. And that following these regulative principles is the most natural thing and the most natural way for us to navigate the world, but it's the least normal thing to do in our society. So navigating that, like for me coming into bhakti, that was where I also go towards more fanatical, and I can just like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. Like, tell me how to be the best at it and I got it. Here's the prescription. Perfect, right? But that's not the way we have a sustainable practice in bhakti. It's not how we actually maintain this and have it be sustainable and something that we are choosing. And it reminds me, Shami, of when we go back to the yoga ladder of like not trying to be at a higher place than you are, or more advanced on the path or not, and to do it systematically and have guidance and like this, and slowly like wean off of those things by replacing it with a higher taste versus just taking it away. And then the piece that you just named around, specifically you said developing trust in our acharyas, right? So like having faith in our teachers, like, oh, I'm not the first person to start practicing bhakti. I'm not the first person who struggled with following these rules and regulations, and it's tried and true, and it's been around for so long, and there's like time after time after time after time after time, there's examples of how this works and how it's benefited and uplifted someone. So in order to have trust in our acharyas, we have to like know things about our acharyas. So that was just reminding me of like the importance of also reading like autobiographies and, you know, and biographies on Prabhupada, and
Developing a relationship.
With our acharyas, so that you can build more trust, just like we're building trust with Krishna by spending time with him in our sadhana, in our sangha, like to go back and also learn about our acharyas who may not be in their bodies anymore. Yeah. Right. In order to grow trust. I also, before we take more comments and reflections, I want to mention one aspect of this niyamagraha thing, that you know, our relationship to following rules can also exist. Like when we look at other devotees, there can be this tendency eventually of looking at devotees and thinking that one is less advanced because they're not following this, or they're doing things wrong, or because I'm more advanced, or because that person is following these rules very strictly, they're more advanced, like that. It's really important to understand this fundamental thing about bhakti. It is practiced individually, and it is practiced under guidance. So what that means is that the guidance is, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur puts it in his description of this verse, uses some Sanskrit terminology that I want to find here. That's right. It's sadhu sangha svato vare. A devotee should associate with devotees who are more advanced than them and who are like-minded and willing to help. So because of that guidance, our guides know the rules and regulations, and they also see where we are, and they see what's next for us. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna says, he gives a definition of piety and impiety in one verse. And it's actually really simple. He says, Sve sveyatikari yanishta sagunaf parikyutitaha. He says, to act according to one's adhikari, one's qualification, to act according to your own level, that is piety. To try to act above it is impiety. To try to act below it is also impiety. Bhaktivinoda Thakur puts this into a visual analogy for us. When you're trying to get to Krishna, you're trying to advance in bhakti, it's like climbing a ladder. You can't climb a ladder all at once. And we try to do that, you'll trip. You'll hit yourself in the nose. It won't work. There's all these little things called steps, these rungs on the ladder. When you're climbing a ladder, he says, you have to grab onto the next rung and let go of the lower rung. If you're climbing too slowly, he says, progress will be distant. If you're trying to climb too fast, you'll trip and fall, right? So it's really important to understand what our adhikari is, what our qualification, what my level is, what is my actual mature level right now. If I don't have the capacity to try to chant like 100 rounds a day, like Haridas Thakur, the great Acharya of the Holy Name, did, if I try to do that and I judge myself based on my ability to do that, that's incorrect. That's fanaticism. If I have the capacity to chant 4 rounds a day, and one day I wake up and I say, you know what, I don't feel like it today. I'm going to just try and chant. I'll chant 2, or maybe I'll chant none. That's also not going to help.
if our guides and our mentors and our own mature intelligence is ascertained, I actually can do 4 every day without a problem. It's like maybe a stretch for me, but it's not outside practicality. I will do it every day. Then the day when your mind is like, I don't feel like it, I'm not gonna do any. You got to be like, no, we're doing 4. We're just doing it because I know that we can do 4. So otherwise, you're whimsical. So it's important to see where you're at and how that you're advancing step by step. Whether it's increasing your chanting, whether it's taking the next step in purifying your diet or offering your food to Krishna more often, or maybe you want to increase your hearing of Shastra, reading every day. Just having goals and having a sense of one's qualification, where one is at, really, really important. And then based on that, also the next step is not judging other people based on where they're at. Because somebody may be following the rules much better than you, but you don't know what's happening internally. You don't know if they're following beyond their qualification, or they're struggling with things you don't even see, or you see someone is not following this thing. But if they're following their bhakti practice under guidance, it's not for us to say. It's not for us to say, oh, well, yeah, but they're like chanting less rounds than me. So, don't even let that enter your head. That's just your ego. That's a trap. Our only concern should be, are people following under guidance sincerely? And then if they are, not my problem, unless I'm their guide. Then yeah. But that's a very serious and sober duty to take. And if it's not our duty, really a great idea not to do that, because all that judgment and stuff of ourself or of others is a really, really common impediment in devotional practice. So now we'll take any more comments and reflections and questions on niyamagraha, abandoning rules over liberality, blindly accepting rules over conservatism. Anything that stands out on that, or you'd like to bring up or ask?
I have a reflection, because even Kelly can vouch to this. I really had a challenging time accepting regulative principles, and definitely would swing between whimsicality and like fanaticism. But what I found most helpful, from my direct experience, is really applying like what's appropriate. How can I be really honest with myself? Like, where am I really? And then like really accepting it to be an individual approach. And I had wrote something down from last week that like I have to learn how to serve as Julia and not as anyone else. And just sort of like that verse around, better to do your duty imperfectly than someone else's perfectly. And I was like, right. It's like, yes, regular, like the principles are spot on, totally get it. And I have to find the way in which, it will truly, like with truth, work for me. And the more that, I study and practice this, or practice the practice, I think it really took, like, I couldn't trust the process until I had more trust in myself. And from like an ego standpoint, it really was humbling. So it's like I had to have this dose of humility around it,
Right.
which was kind of like a little bit harsh. But then I also had to, be really compassionate in how I trusted myself, to then therefore trust myself in the process. So I'm just grateful that it was sort of, brought up in that way.
Yeah. When it comes to following the footsteps, you hear this expression, to follow in the footsteps of the previous acharyas, right? That's actually one of the principles. That's the next verse, things you should do. To follow the footsteps of the previous acharyas. Tat karma pravartanat is the Sanskrit. And it's a very subtle thing. And we'll talk about it more when we get to that next week or the week after. But it means to emulate, not to imitate. To emulate, but not to imitate. To imitate, like you can imitate really easily. You just put on a Halloween costume, you put on little makeup, you ape something. You kind of like make a little show of it. And you can fool yourself, you can fool others. But that's not spiritual life. It's not to imitate. Prabhupada walked like this. He had a Bengali accent, or he did like, you can imitate that. You can imitate anything about Prabhupada or anybody. But to emulate means to actually see the essence of what they're doing and to see the goal. Just like we've been saying over and over again, when you're flying a plane, you have to know your goal so that you can come back to center, because the wind is blowing you left, it's blowing you right, up and down. Air pressure is changing. So many things are changing. You have to adjust. Emulate means I know where I'm going. My goal is Prabhupada, my guru, the Bhagavad Gita. What they're saying is my goal. I'm emulating that. I can't follow it perfectly right now, but I can follow it this much, and I won't let myself go below that. And I'm working on the next step toward that. That's emulation. It's like, I'm not going to let someone else take that place of where I'm aiming. Otherwise, I'll end up far off course, right? Even a little bit of deviation, you can have very far off course. Like if you're in a plane and you're like a quarter of a degree off, and you fly for 10 hours, you're going to end up in a completely different part of the world, a different continent. So having that goal super clear and never deviating from it, that's emulating. But also not letting yourself think I am there or I have to be there exactly right now. Having that gentleness with yourself, and also the honesty to be like, oh yeah, but I'm not there. Otherwise you convince yourself I really am, you know. So there's a very fine balancing act to be undertaken there. Is like, I'm not gonna think I can't get there, because the scripture says I'm supposed to, and I'm qualified to in this life as a human. I'm allowed to get there. Permission has been granted. No matter how fallen I start, no matter how low my number is, I can get to the highest goal. I can reach that high number, and it's going to take doing it systematically. So, yeah, that relates to not falling off the end of blind following or blind, because sometimes people will abandon bhakti because they think they can never reach the goal. I'm not going to even chant Hare Krishna anymore because there's no point. I can't chant more than this much. I can't get over this addiction. I can't do this. I can't do that. I'm never going to get there. So the whole process doesn't work. Flush it down the toilet. I give up. Right. And it's like, or this is great. This is perfect. This is for me. I'm going to do everything right now. I'm all about this. I will take on all, and then they're like trying to climb all the steps of the ladder at the same time, and they're just going to fall down. They're going to create trouble. So, yeah, our relationship to our practice and our ability to emulate and not imitate. Thank you. Let's move on and just touch on the last two things. Janasanga and Lolya. Janasanga means to associate with worldly minded persons. So as we see in the purport of Srila Prabhupada, Janasanga refers to associating with persons not interested in Krishna consciousness. One should always engage in the service of the Lord in the association of the Lord's devotees. Association with those engaged in a similar line of business is very conducive to advancement in that business. Consequently, materialistic persons form various associations and clubs to enhance their endeavors. For example, in the business world, we find such institutions as the Stock Exchange and Chamber of Commerce. And then he says something very important. It's so important, I'm going to share the screen here. He gives the purpose for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, he says. Second. Similarly, we have established the International Society for Krishna Consciousness to give people an opportunity to associate with those who have not forgotten Krishna. That's why ISKCON exists. That's why we get together in the Sangha, to give people an opportunity to associate with those who are not forgetting Krishna, who are remembering Krishna. And this principle is so important that it's highlighted in the terminology of Janasanga, associating with worldly minded persons. So there's some subtlety there, obviously, especially because we're not, none of us are monks or renunciates. Even when I was a monk, what to speak of now, I had to associate with everybody in the world. I mean, part of my service was to go out and distribute books to people on the street who were like, they hadn't even come to our temple and opted in to say they're interested in spiritual life. Like, I'm definitely associating with them. But this principle of association is a very subtle thing. Association doesn't just mean to be in the same room as somebody. It fundamentally means to open up your heart to them. To open up your heart to them and to take on their values. Right? So you can take association and you can also give association. So when we're at our workplace or we're with people who are not spiritually minded, we have to associate with them on some level, because we're not advised to be ignoring them, putting the blinders on, not having conversations, quitting our job, doing drastic, weird things like that. However, we're advised to protect our heart, right? We don't have to, and we're not supposed to reveal our heart, open our heart, take on the values of just anybody. It's up to us to use discrimination to see, is this person living a life that I want to live like? And if so, I want to take their values. For them, I really should, with those examples, I want to take what they have to give. Just like Arjuna's like, I give up, like Krishna, whatever you got from me, give it to me. I surrender to you. That's what we want to have with like-minded persons, especially those who are more advanced than us, but even our peers in bhakti. But with those who are not, we can give sangha, we can give association, we can share some things for them if they want to hear it. But if they say to us, oh, you got to watch the latest episode of I don't even know, like this TV show or that movie. It's like Star Wars 35,001, the newest Star Wars movies. Yep. Prabhupada gave the example. So when you hear that kind of advice, you should nod and smile and say, yes, very good. That's excellent advice, and do exactly what you're going to do without being swayed. You may have to like nod and smile, and like maybe even your parents who mean well will give you advice that's not the best in the world. And you don't be like, you're wrong, this is why you're wrong. Okay, thanks, mom. Thanks, dad. I appreciate that. That's cool. Yeah, I'll think about it. But you don't open your heart to that if you have assessed that that is at a level of consciousness that's just going to take you down. You can be with them. You can be in the same room. You can be in a family reunion. In fact, after this, I'm going to go upstairs and say hi to some family I haven't seen in a little while. And yeah, and they're very dear to me. And the advice is there not to give your heart away and just like anybody who talks to you, all of a sudden, like you just magnetically attach yourself to their belief system and their values and their principles and their morality and their practices. Like if you do that, you'll never get anywhere, because you're constantly like being tossed around by the wind. You have to have a little bit of fixity in associating with spiritually minded persons, their advice, so that your heart doesn't get moved by the ideas of the billboards and commercials and music videos and whatever of the world, because they're all there. They're always going to be there. None of us here are going to live on a mountaintop. We have to deal with those things, those messages. Just don't open your heart and take it all in and say it's all on the same level. Because then if you do that, then you're starting to become guilty of jana sangha, and it's an impediment. And the last one is laulya, greed, to have a hankering for material things. So a couple of points on that. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Bhogaishvarya prasaktanam tayapa hrita chetasam vyavasayatmaka buddhir samadho navidhyate. For those whose minds are very much attached to material sense enjoyment, to have steadiness in bhakti and in devotional life and spiritual life is very difficult for them. So as Krishna says, the mind can be the best friend or the worst enemy. If your mind is constantly hankering for material things, it's a problem, because it's an enemy. It's an enemy, and it's whispering in your ear, do this, do that. You always have this greed, this hankering, this unresolved desire for things that are not good for you. So in our devotional practice, we have to allow ourselves to become convinced of the usefulness, the goodness of spiritual goals, and the relative non-usefulness of material goals. And if we still have a hankering for some things, we have to regulate those things. Like everybody has a hankering for some kind of food, right? So we have to find those kinds of foods that we can offer, that we really like, and that we really like, adore, and we hanker for. We can have them, but have them in a regulated way. Like, again, I've said this so many times. You love ice cream? Great. Just don't have it every day. Don't gorge yourself on it. Have a regulation, so that even if that part of you that's like always going to be crazy about ice cream exists, you at least are never going to fall off the tracks and just like binge and go into a sugar coma. So regulation is protection in that context, and just gradually becoming more and more convinced of the ideas and the goals that are given by bhakti practitioners, by bhakti scripture, that actually it is really good for me to aim for Krishna. It is really good to aim for the spiritual world. It's really in my best interest to have a full-blown relationship with Krishna. Those are great ideas. But it's not going to help if we just let them stay at the level of ideas. We have to become convinced of those things intellectually and also by practice, so we can feel what it's like to have a deepening relationship with Krishna. So then when something comes and we know, I could do that thing, but it'll damage my relationship with Krishna. It'll create forgetfulness of him. It'll distract me. It'll damage my body or mind, so I can't practice. Then ultimately, if you're like, no, I really want to wake up tomorrow and chant good job. I really want to go to the Sangha. I really want to serve the devotees. I have a greed for meeting my spiritual goals. I have this service I want to do really well. I don't have time for that. Then you can weather those challenges. You won't have that material greed for material goals because you're going over here, you know? Another thing to say about that is, as always, letting go of a lower thing means accepting a higher thing. It's really good to be greedy in spiritual life. If you can't get to a certain level yet, aim there and be greedy for it and think about it. Be like, I can't wait to finish reading the whole Srimad Bhagavatam. I want to finish the whole 12 cantos. I want that. I want to memorize my first verse of Bhagavad Gita. I want to memorize it and share it with my friends. I'm a greedy for that. You know, find some goal. I want to cook a feast for Krishna, invite my friends and feed them prasadam. I've never done that. I really want to do that. Like, think about that. Become greedy for that. Collect those things. Meditate on those things, because then that party that wants to collect and make it yours and think about things and achieve things and like enjoy things is being used. You're flexing that muscle, but it's in relationship to Krishna. I want to go to that temple. I saw a picture of Krishna there. He's so beautiful. I want to go to that temple and see that picture of Krishna and offer him a flower. And I'm going to go there on holidays. I'm going to do it. I don't care what happens. I'm going to save up the money. I'm going to go to Vrindavan, to Krishna Balaram temple, and see the beautiful Krishna Balaram and give them a flower, you know, for example. So those are some thoughts. And sorry to rush the last two. Niyamagraha, I always feel are very, very deep. So to summarize, we had over-attachment to the rules, overly abandoning the rules, and then jana sangha, opening one's heart, taking in the values of worldly-minded persons, and laulya, even sounds like greed, laulya, greed, hankering for material goals which are not going to help us. Hare Krishna. Let's take a couple more reflections before we end it. Anything that stood out? And then for this week, please reflect in the chat, again, anything you heard, one thing, and also just one societal application of the principle of jana sangha, you know, opening your heart to other people improperly and being degraded by that, or material greed, what happens when the mind is consumed by that, or niyamagraha, over attachment to the rules or whimsically rejecting the rules, what that looks like in society for other people, for groups of people, and how that can play out, and give a reflection on that. And now we'll take any reflections from today. Anything that stood out? It doesn't have to be a great speech. It doesn't have to be unique. Just anything that stood out means you heard it and you thought it was relevant, and you're going to take it home. If someone pulls you aside and said, what was that guy talking about in there? You'll say, he said this, and I think it's valuable. Any reflection?
Well, for me,
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just always appreciative when it's conveyed that the practice is individually, and especially when Julia said, I can only practice as Julia,
Right.
because so many times, and not just on my spiritual journey, but just in any hobbies or things I might take on, if I don't think I'm doing it at a certain level, I give up. And then there's a pile of things I started and never finished that I'm really interested in and passionate about, but maybe I can be here and still and still participate. So it just feels very welcoming and just very easy to be a part of and be attracted to. And
I agree. And it really makes our relationship with the rules and regulations and the signposts and the steps much more pragmatic and healthy, instead of being like, oh my God, I'm like having this aversion or fear because we know we can't follow perfectly, or having this unhealthy pride and like, I'm so great, I'm doing it perfectly. It's like, none of those things are true. We're actually, I can only practice as me. Julia can only be Julia. This is who we are, and being gentle with ourselves, and also The beauty of bhakti is that, with other things like hobbies or like a language, not everyone's good at everything. Like I remember playing the clarinet in band or whatever. I sucked. It's terrible. I was never good at that instrument. Ended up being pretty good on the guitar and drums, but I need to find my niche. But bhakti is not a niche thing. It's not for people who speak this language or have that kind of mentality or that kind of intelligence or photographic memory, or it's for everybody. It's actually a spiritual thing. So you may not practice exactly like your idols do. They're always going to be them, but you will have something special to offer Krishna and you will please him. And that's enough. You can be a pure devotee with what you have to offer, because you as an individual soul are not lacking. There's no way in which the material ways that we're lacking hold us back in bhakti. Not a problem. So that's the beauty, because you may look at I took up karate, I gave up lessons after 2 weeks. I started learning Spanish, I couldn't do it. All these, I left them all the wayside. I can't finish anything. It's like, bhakti's for you. Bhakti is made for you. You're made for bhakti. So don't worry about that, because the reality is not everyone's going to be, great at every material hobby or thing. And that's just the way it is. That's not politically correct, but it's a fact. When you tell our kids, like, you can do anything you want, you can be the president of the United States, it's not actually true. Not materially, you can't do anything you want. Spiritually, you can. Spiritually, you can.
Even moving ahead in the studies felt a little daunting and scary to me, because, well, now we're going on to the second book, but I'm still not at this higher level. Can I really be part of this group? And it's just things that go in my mind.
Yeah, well, Srila Prabhupada had to study Nectar of Instruction in the early days. If they're like 1 week into the movement, they're reading this book. They read Nectar of Devotion, which is a very advanced book. And in the evenings, Srimad Bhagavatam in the mornings, Bhagavad Gita at noon. There is absolutely, what we're reading is totally appropriate for anybody who wants to practice bhakti. Yeah, there's no necessity of being this advanced. Like I said, Nectar of Instruction basically means you believe that bhakti is a good way to practice your life or live your life. And you want to do it, and you want to know how to do it well. That's your qualification. That's it.
Let's hear from Melanie.
Oh, gee. I don't know. Thanks for that. I mean, this is like so much of what I've been like thinking about for a while. And it's just, I think it's always reassuring to hear the process like laid out so plainly or easily or directly. Doesn't have to be all muddled, or it doesn't have to feel big. And so I just really appreciated that tonight, just like really hearing all the lessons, all the teachings, and just being able to apply them to what's been happening in my heart. And yeah, that's all I got for you tonight.
Thank you.
So thank you.
And I forgot to mention, please read the first half of the third verse. The third verse is the 6 things that nourish your bhakti, that are favorable. And the first 3 items are utsahan nishchaya dharya, which is enthusiasm, determination, and patience. So you can read about those 3 things. At least you can read their whole purport. Go for it. It's fantastic. But we'll be examining enthusiasm, determination, and patience next week.
How far into the purport does that go on?
About half.
Okay.
Any other reflections on things that stood out, or questions? Things you'd like to bring up that you considered interesting? Tanya.
I think it's just an interesting connection between a few of them, right? So last time you talked about the unnecessary talking, and tonight we talked about like over attachment to the rules, and like you can really pair a lot of those together. Like, I think you said a quote, something along the lines, if you don't have the service of correcting others, and we can put in there about the rules,
Yeah.
then you shouldn't, right? And then, there's, even if you look at, associating with worldly minded persons, we're all on a different ladder rung of this, and somebody that's newer to this, we could start unnecessarily talking as if we know the things and correct them
Yeah.
unnecessarily. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's just interesting when you start looking at these in combination.
Yeah, Prajalpa, to speak unnecessarily about unnecessary things, had a few different subtleties, and one of the subtleties that Bhaktivinoda Thakur talked about was criticizing and gossiping. Right? A certain amount of criticism is necessary because it means discrimination. This is better, this is worse. When you say this is better, this is worse, automatically you're criticizing the thing that's worse. That's coming up. Prabhupada criticizes, I'm criticizing. We're all using discrimination, but improper criticism when we decide to, like, yeah, as you said, like, tell somebody we don't know very well, we don't know their ins and outs of their life, they've not surrendered to us. We tell them, this is not good, this is good for you. We make ourselves their guru. That is a kind of prajalpa, actually. Yeah. So there's definitely like an overlap there. It's a flavor of prajalpa where we're like getting into the rules and regulations. It maybe makes us feel like we're better or whatever function it may serve the ego. But yeah. On the other hand, if somebody is less advanced than you and they come to you and they ask humbly, like they want to know, and you answer in good faith to the best of your knowledge, it's a fully acceptable thing to do. That's actually a devotional exchange.
Thank you.
Any more comments or questions? Okay. Well, it's fantastic being with all of you, and wonderful to finish the second verse of the Nectar of Instruction. We'll read the first half of verse 3, and we'll post this on YouTube. Obeisances to our YouTube and online hearers and listeners and viewers. And we'll take any comments, questions, reflections in the WhatsApp, and any applications of these three principles at the societal level in the WhatsApp thread. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Rupa Goswami ki jai. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyev cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. See you next week.
Hare Bol.